This is Kentucky's Voice Radio, covering the latest state and local issues with Tom Fallbush, Bob Scott, and Jim Waters.
Howdy, Kentucky. This is Dr. Lance Pearson. I'm your special host on Kentucky's Voice. We are on 970 AM. We also have a rebroadcast tonight at 4 p.m. on Channel 21 on Spectrum, which is WBNA. Today, we're going to talk about a very interesting and hot topic in the Kentuckiana, Louisville area, data centers. There is a large data center that seems to be progressing very quickly in Jefferson County by a company named Powerhouse. There was two proposed data centers in Oldham County. And so today we're going to basically talk about what even is a data center, what are some of the proposals that have been made for how we should regulate those data centers, what are some of the barriers that the developers have apparently run into in the Oldham County project that don't seem to be present in Jefferson County. But as the lead into this story, let me just preface this. What if I told you that an outside company had proposed the largest one-time investment in Kentucky history, $6 billion, even bigger than the $5.5 billion battery plant that they just built in Glendale? And what if I then told you that the county residents apparently weren't very interested in having that come to their county? What if I told you that the scandals around this project already resulted in one high-level county official being fired and the project, at least for now, being pulled? But more projects are likely to be on the way. I think it's a very interesting story that's developed over the length of this year. I have two guests. Hopefully we'll be able to get the second one, audio issues, worked out. But two guests that are on either side of this story. What I've found in the coverage of these data centers is we often only get one side of the story. And so I thought it would be great. Number one, it would have been great radio to have a person on one side of the story come in and have a battle royale on the air with the person on the other side. I didn't think that was going to be very educational. However, I want people to really understand this issue because over the next decade, this is likely to be a large part of the economic development of the Louisville area, greater Louisville area, and maybe Kentucky as a state as large. So what I wanted to do was set up an interview with a person that's more on the pro side of bringing in data center businesses. That person is David Bazanis. And then if we can get the audio worked out, I'm hoping to have on State Senator Lindsey Titchener, who over the process of the Oldham County proposal came to be on the opposite side of at least one of those proposals, maybe not a more scaled down proposal that they eventually made. So before I bring on either of those guests, let me give you some background on what is a data center, why are these at all interesting, what's the controversy? Why would anybody want to turn down $6 billion in investment maybe for their county? Okay, so first, let me give you some background on Oldham County and kind of compare it to Jefferson County, since we have data center proposals in both Jefferson County, Louisville, and there just were two proposals in Oldham County. First, we all know Louisville is the biggest city in the state of Kentucky. Jefferson County and Louisville merged in 2003. Oldham is roughly 1/10 the size of Jefferson County. So whereas Jefferson County has a little under 800,000 people, almost a million, Oldham County has somewhere around 70,000 residents. So much smaller. It's more similar to Bullitt County, Spencer County, Shelby County, those other collar counties of Louisville. Another key difference between these two, and this is important when we're talking about regulations and getting public officials on board with any of these economic development projects, Louisville has a unique government structure in the state of Kentucky. There's 120 counties in the state of Kentucky. 119 of them have a government structure that's similar to Oldham counties, and there is a judge executive who is on top. He's the chief executive officer of that county, even though they're often referred to as judges. They aren't actually judges in the way that we think of a judge in a courtroom. And they're also governed by a legislature of each county called a fiscal court. Those fiscal courts are made up of 8 magistrates in every county except for Jefferson. Now, Jefferson has a merged city-county government. They have a mayor that is the chief executive officer of the county, and they have a 26-member metro council. So a lot of cooks in the kitchen there in Jefferson County. It's a much bigger county, though, so you can understand why there's more of them. Now, a couple of other key differences between Oldham County and Jefferson and other counties. Oldham County does have the highest median income by far in Kentucky. It's a very wealthy county. The median income in Oldham County is $121,000. The second on that list is Spencer County at about $95,000. So almost $25,000 in median income, more wealthy than any other county in the state. It's also either the first or the second most educated county in the state. About 45% of all the residents of Oldham County have a bachelor's degree. That's roughly tied with Fayette County, where University of Kentucky is. A lot of professors and stuff there in Fayette. But both of those counties are significantly have higher educational attainment than the rest of the counties. And so there is also a very vibrant public school system in Oldham County. Of the 3 high schools that are in Oldham County, South Oldham is ranked number 7 in the state. North Oldham is ranked number 11 in the state, and Oldham County is ranked number 17 in the state out of the 320 or so high schools. So they take their public education very seriously. Obviously, the wealth and the educational attainment of the parents in the county are a big factor in that. Okay, so that's a little background on Oldham County, and we'll get into it a little later. That might be a lot of the reason that there was much more civic engagement on the part of Oldham County residents and maybe some more pushback than there has been in Jefferson. All right, let me get into a little bit of what a data center is. And I'm covering all this so that you're not bored by having David or Lindsay have to explain all these details. So what is a data center? Why are these at all controversial? Well, a data center is just a building that has a lot of computers that's used for processing data. Sounds rather innocuous. There's a little bit more technical definition, but that's the basics. Now, your smaller data centers are not controversial at all. They can be a small building, maybe 50 by 100. They don't have generators. They may not even have external air condition other than just to keep the temperature so workers are comfortable. And so you wouldn't even know the difference between them and a random warehouse that got put up in a commercial district in your city. However, although these things have been around for the last 20 years, there's been a big change in the way data centers operate in the last 5 or so years. There has come to be a type of data center called a hyperscale data center. Now, in principle, they do the same thing. It's still a bunch of computers that are doing a bunch of calculations. However, whereas the old data centers, usually you wanted to have those up at least 23 out of 24 hours. These were doing things like hosting websites, maybe doing some computations for a hospital system, and they just mostly had to be up. But if they were down for an hour, it isn't that big a deal. They just shift around some of the processing, and they handle it fine. These hyperscale data centers tend to be many times bigger than the old style of data centers. Now, these typically can't be down at all. They have to have 24-hour uptime. At no point at any time is the electricity off for that building. As a result, they tend to have on-site generators. So they'll have diesel generators, maybe natural gas turbines, that if the power were to go down, they can still keep that facility up and running. And they also will have sophisticated cooling systems, usually liquid cooling. because these computers are basically running as fast as they can, as hard as they can, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They have to keep the temperatures down so that those computers don't melt down, basically. And so just the scale, some of these facilities can be, each one of the warehouses, 250,000 square feet. So, maybe multiple floors, 200 by 500 feet, giant buildings. They often have multiple buildings on a given campus. So you might have 6 or 8 of those gigantic warehouses all together in one collective. And some of the advantages of that are you can have on-site engineers that are responsible for all of those different buildings. Whereas if you had one smaller building, maybe some of the engineers aren't even on site, and they can come in whenever the power goes down. They can come in and work on things in 30 minutes and have things back up. You can't have any downtime in these hyperscale data centers. So you often have on-site engineers that are ready to take care of any issue at a moment's notice, and they can flip on those generators and have them up and running in a matter of seconds. Okay. All right. Now, what are some of the energy requirements of some of these things? And after the break, we'll get into some of the pros of these data centers with David Bazanis. But what's the type of scale? Well, for the data center that's proposed in Louisville, that's going to consume 400 megawatts of power capacity. The initial proposal in Oldham County was for 600 megawatts. Now, for reference, a megawatt is 1,000 kilowatts, and each home over the course of an entire year, your average U.S. home uses about 11 megawatts. So the Oldham County proposal would have used in 1 hour the same amount of electricity that 56 average homes use in an entire year, or the equivalent of 486,000.
You get a long day after this?
Just back to work.
Yeah.
Basically.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Welcome back to Kentucky's Voice. I'm your special host, Dr. Lance Pearson of the Kentucky Liberty Caucus. I have now a special guest, David Bazanis. David is the president of the Oldham County Chamber and Economic Development, where they basically are responsible for attracting businesses, keeping businesses in the county, and developing them. and he was very involved in kind of recruiting or at least guiding the data center projects that were proposed in Oldham County. So welcome on, David.
Hi, Dr. Pearson. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I like when I interview to let the person talk. So just tell me a little bit about yourself. What's your connection to Louisville and to Oldham County?
Sure. Well, I grew up in Louisville, born and raised there. Our family has a music store that had been there for a long time. So I grew up working there and sweeping the floors and selling instruments and playing the piano and teaching some lessons and doing things like that. I ended up coming to Oldham County to work at the Chamber of Commerce in 2009. A year later, we merged with economic development, and so my interest was very piqued at being able to work in the community with the business community, and a lot of businesses that were very similar to the one I grew up in. So it was a fantastic opportunity to learn a lot of things. I have a degree in political science from University of Louisville, and I coincidentally had interned with Ernie Harris in the state Senate years prior. So I had an interest in all of these things, and then I married a girl from Crestwood. So my kids have been in Oldham County schools since kindergarten. I live in LaGrange. We've lived in LaGrange for 2.5 years, 3 years now, but I've worked at the Chamber since 2009.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Now, tell me a little bit more about the organization that you're the president of.
Yes.
It's the Oldham Chamber and Economic Development.
Yeah, so we refer to it as OSED. So the Chamber of Commerce does a lot of traditional chamber functions. So we're there to cultivate the business community. We have a golf scramble that's coming up here in a couple of weeks at Eagle Creek Golf Course. We also have Person of the Year dinner and lots of programs to try to help create opportunities for the local business leaders to connect with each other and get the resources they may need to be able to thrive. And so we have a chamber director, Kara Sanders, and Mindy Arney is our marketing director, and they manage all of our chamber functions and events. And it's a really great organization. Very proud of the team we have there. And then the economic development side is myself and Sandy Hamilton, my colleague, who was in commercial real estate for her whole career. She was from LaGrange. Her father was Commonwealth attorney years ago. And when she retired and came back to LaGrange, I was able to twist her arm and get her to come work with us. So she's been with us since 2017. And that's been a tremendous help at being able to understand and speak the language of a lot of the commercial development that is going on in the county as, of course, residential keeps growing. So a really significant part of this conversation, I think, has to do with, well, what is our role in any of this? Are we elected? Are we appointed? And we are governed by a board of directors that is made up of 15. 9 are elected by the chamber membership, 3 are appointed by the Oldham County Fiscal Court or the judge executive and then confirmed by the court, 1 by the city of LaGrange, 1 by the city of Crestwood, and then the board also has a seat for whoever is the superintendent of schools. So it is a largely private sector board, and even the appointees that are on there are longtime chamber members in a lot of cases. But a little bit more than half of our funding comes from Oldham County Fiscal Court, City of LaGrange, City of Crestwood, and the remainder of that through chamber dues, sponsorships, and top investment through the business community. So the significance of that in not being, in a lot of economic development, the traditional role of somebody like me would be an employee of fiscal court or a judge executive or a staff person. Right. What this allows for is the community saying, we would like to have a neutral party where all of the elected officials, the nonprofits, and the business community can come to kind of shepherd through conversations that might happen if people want to invest or if they need help in advocacy. So I always say that our job is to advocate for projects that grow the tax base, that grow our infrastructure, and that bring us good quality jobs. And once we identify something that's good for the county in that term, then we start trying to find a place for it. So a large part of our time on economic development is helping with recruiting, working with our local businesses to find spots if they need to move or expand, and site selection is a big part of that. And I know we're going to get into the data center stuff to begin with, but one of the things that was unique about this circumstance with the proposed data center was that we were not approached for site selection. In fact, we were notified once a site had been selected. And so that created a set of circumstances that made it pretty tricky to navigate with my intention, which was as we were vetting the project, but also to get a sense of, it was in the wrong spot, but we didn't want to lose it to another community or another county, and as is our responsibility. So, we went through a long process to get where we are, and there's still a lot of data center interest. There's not any recruiting going on of data centers, but and I would even say, I think you mentioned projects by LG&E trying to bring
Yeah.
data centers here. I think that it's more that there's an environment that data centers are flocking to because it's been created at the state level, and then of course with natural assets or utility assets like the power that LG&E's run from Trimble County through Oldham County and all the way up I-71. This is where those targets are, and I've heard that this is a very common thing. It's happening all over the country in a lot of areas. So
Right. Okay. So to summarize, the fiscal court does fund about half.
more than
of
half,
the
yes. A little bit more than
OCED,
half, yes.
and they do appoint some members of the board, but essentially you operate separately, independently of
Correct.
the fiscal court.
I
You
report
work
to the
together,
fiscal court,
but
yes. If they're not happy with the job we're doing, then they'll pull our funding, and probably
Right.
wouldn't be too hard.
okay. All right. Yep. Okay. You kind of jumped ahead, but
I did, sorry.
yeah, but let's hop in.
Okay.
So on the data center topic,
Sure.
the entity that has proposed 2 different locations for data centers in Oldham County is called Western Hospitality Partners. Can you just basically, in your understanding, nobody's really heard of
Sure.
Western Hospitality Partners?
Sure.
It's kind of a shell corporation or
Right.
something.
Right.
So who are they? Have they ever developed any data center projects to your knowledge? And,
Well,
yeah.
they're supposedly involved in multiple data center projects. They have investors. They look for projects to make money, like a lot of investors. And there are lots of projects of all different types of industry where we get approached by folks that are just kind of inquiring. And in some cases, folks start developments and then they sell the developments to others or to the user. And so, those details are all always moving targets with any project you're talking about. One other thing that was unique in our working, not just on this project, but was the atmosphere that was kind of growing. About a year prior to our knowledge that Western Hospitality was specifically targeting the 53 site, we had a lot of kind of buzz around through discussions with utilities and local landowners that there was interest in, what do you think it is? And of course, when you hear about certain amounts of acreage that get put under contract, you start going, well, okay, well, what would somebody put in that area for that? And, it doesn't take too long before you can kind of figure some things out. So we knew there was a lot of activity. We didn't know who was who as far as what investors, how many data centers there were and whatnot. And there were certain things that the utilities would share with us and then some that they couldn't. So, there was kind of all right, well, we have the power lines running right over Commerce Parkway, and that's an industrial area, and that makes sense that would be
Right.
a place to go. So we're excited about the opportunity to have that. So it was in February, I think the 24th was my first meeting with representatives of WHP.
Okay. February.
Yeah,
Okay.
so not them directly, where they let us know that the 53 site was the site that they were looking at. And so from that point forward, we expressed that this was going to be not the right location, and it was going to cause a lot of challenges. I think that they thought they knew that too, and so my intention was to try to get them to an industrial site that was appropriate, and try to what was being proposed was a $6 billion project.
Right.
And so what does that look like? What are these details? Not too long after that, we received some, economic impact numbers that they had prepared by Commonwealth Economics, and they all made sense as far as if you impute the numbers into the formulas for the taxes and whatnot. That those were really large, unseen numbers, really, when you look at tax base growth.
Right.
And so, however, it all of those everything on that economic impact study was it also said that this was subject to incentives. Well, we typically are the go-between, or we interface with the state and with the local governments on anything that would be incentive related. Again, we have no authority. I don't get commissions based off of how many businesses come in or do any of those things. It's really
Right.
just trying to make sure that we can grow these investments based on those 3 criteria that I shared. So, so when they come in and you don't know who they are, and they announce a project, then instantly it's okay. Well, we don't want to lose this, but we've got to fix this situation. And
Right.
so I think ultimately we ended up successfully through a lot of pain, a lot of folks getting it to a more
We'll be
appropriate
right
area.
back.
Oh, sorry.
Now, back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Welcome back. I'm Dr. Lance Pearson here on Kentucky's Voice, 970 AM. And remember, there is a broadcast on TV today at 7 p.m. on Spectrum Channel 21, WBNA. We'll also probably have a podcast up that we'll send links out. We return with David Bazanis, continuing to talk about some of the positives of data centers in this next segment. Let me first start off with why, in your discussions with WHP and the other developments, why Jefferson County, but in particular Oldham County, is so attractive for these data center projects. What brought them to Oldham County, and why is that a great site for potential data centers in the future?
Sure. Well, the three things that were really important to data centers are power, and then water, and then fiber. Location is everything for every project. Obviously, Oldham County has an affluent community, a highly educated community, and there's the proximity to Louisville that adds for the amenities. I think that that's partially part of it when folks have to figure out how they're going to recruit people to work. Makes it a little bit more challenging to put some of these in more rural areas, but still very possible. And so those were probably the primary drivers there. We were aware that there was a lot of power that went through, the KSR site and over Commerce Parkway for a long time, and so knew that that was going to be a natural advantage to some project at some point. We didn't anticipate hyperscale data centers were a thing until recently. So
okay. So there's lots of good reasons that Oldham County is pretty attractive for data center develop. Same for Jefferson County.
Sure.
Now, what made this project attractive to Oldham County?
Right.
Why would they want one of these projects to potentially come in? This is a part of the story that I feel like, even being like really involved in the whole process of data center and the skepticism, community forums, all of the discussions, we really never got a great communication of why would we want this to come into our county.
Sure.
So
well, it's a great question. I feel like the answers get given, but they get overshadowed by other types of things. So one thing that's really difficult in the conversation to discuss is what data center are we talking about? What specifically? And so we could talk about Project Lincoln, but that proposal was specific to the 53 site, which was not something we were advocating for. So what was proposed at Sourback was different, but the intention to be large hyperscale at some point. So the obvious and immediate answer to that is the tax revenue that comes off of these things. So it's an interesting conversation because I understand that there are, and I've watched videos that have been shared about folks that say there's Chick-fil-A can produce more tax revenue than a data center and whatnot. The problem with that argument...
I love a Chick-fil-A also, by the way.
I know, we're working on it. I know that people definitely want that more than a data center, I will say. I would think that that's going to do more health damages to the community than a hyperscale data center will, but that's yet to be discussed. So those attributes, so we were talking about, and I saw on your numbers here, was based off of Project Lincoln, which, $6 billion, $10 billion, $3 billion, who knows where we end up. It's astronomical. The Meta site over in the Facebook project was like $800 million, and that was unheard of at the time. So, we're talking about just unbelievable numbers. Shocking, really. But if we would just go per billion of investment, approximately $8 million a year would go to the Oldham County schools, except one of the challenges we have as an affluent community with a lot of tax revenue is that our school system doesn't receive as much from the state in terms of support through the SEEK formula. So the SEEK formula actually takes about half of that $8 million away. So then it leaves per billion $4 million a year to the school. So and while our schools have made good strides in paying teachers better, it's been just insane that it's been difficult to pay our teachers and bus drivers and the faculty better. So I know that that's improved, but projects like this make it possible where we can say we can have the best school system, we can have the best paid teachers, and the best facilities. So when you take that per billion, that becomes really transformative money. Right. Then there's the money that goes to fiscal court, the fire departments, the health department, the extension service, which actually has a really wonderful project in Crestwood. They're trying to develop a property there. They don't quite have the money to do that. It will take years to do. Right. Those things, these are instant injections of revenue that make those things possible. beneficial and really contribute to the services that are provided. And over time should make it possible for policymakers to lower. I'm not a policymaker, so I don't get to lower taxes, but it does create an environment where that's a possibility. And if we want our young people to be able to move back to Oldham County, we already have high real estate expenses and high interest rates. I don't think they'll go very much lower if they do. Right. So another place we can help that is on property taxes. And while we have a very affluent society, we also have a lot of folks that are just getting by, and those are important numbers for them.
That's right. And so just to kind of reiterate, Oldham County does have the highest property taxes in the state of Kentucky. So it's a very affluent community, but nevertheless, as he said, there are some people that are really struggling to get by. That doesn't mean everyone is very wealthy. Right. And so we do pay the highest property taxes in the state. And so just to break some of those numbers down, David got into the SEEK formula. Oldham County and Jefferson are major SEEK formula losers. And that means, I don't want to get into all the details, but basically if you have a lot of tax revenue that your local schools are getting from local property tax revenue, you share that money into a state pool that gets redistributed to some of the poorer counties in the state. So I understand the rationale for it, but the result is Jefferson County and Oldham County wind up paying a lot of their property taxes that wind up going to other parts of the state, eastern Kentucky, western Kentucky, that don't have as much local tax revenue. But on every $1, and there's a lot of confusion over what taxes would be paid. The state has waived sales and use taxes at the state level for the next 50 years for qualified data center projects. People are under the impression that means they'll pay no taxes. They won't pay any sales or use taxes to the state, but they would pay local property taxes, and that means not only on the buildings themselves, these warehouses that they would put up, but also all of the tangible property that's in these warehouses. And so on the initial $6 billion build, you could imagine that building out 8 warehouses and electrical substations, et cetera, might be $1 billion. But most of the cost of that $6 billion investment would be stocking those warehouses with computer equipment. And so if we're talking about $4 or $5 billion of actual property value and all that, that is a massive influx of property tax revenue. It may actually be more than all of the current property tax for the county as a whole, just in this one property. Yeah. And even the scaled down version that was proposed on Commerce Parkway, if that's $1 billion project, we're still talking millions of dollars in additional revenue. Now, I always say, never count on a politician to give up money. Right. So I'm not expecting my property taxes necessarily will go down, but the judge did mention a lot of projects that he thought would be valuable, that maybe this would help fund. Improve services. Generally, the government grows. Yeah. But nevertheless. Okay. What about the job impact? I know that's a secondary consideration, but for the people,
what was proposed was actually very good. I think it was 182 jobs, $82,000 a year average salary. Those were good jobs. They're higher skilled jobs on average. But one of the things with Oldham County is we have some of the lowest unemployment in the whole state of Kentucky. So it's not a huge driver of what we're doing. We want to make sure the jobs we get in are good quality jobs. For a lot of folks, especially around that area, it gives them a place to go next, right? So they have an entry-level job. Maybe they get better health care, or they go someplace where they can get trained. We've got CNS Manufacturing locating on Commerce Parkway. We've got the new pharmaceutical headquarters at Baptist. Those are offering some really great positions from kids right out of high school and right up. They can go up to JCTC in Carroll County and get over and get a pharmacy tech job, or they can become a machinist and make really great money without any college debt and whatnot. And that's really the ecosystem we want to have, the partnership that's being had between, say, the Arvin Center and those types of employers. And I think a data center doesn't speak specifically to that. It's more of you have what acreage you can develop, and then what is being generated from that acreage. So that that advanced manufacturer, the piece of property that they're building on right now, was generating about $1,000 a year to fiscal court and about $9,000 a year to the schools, and that's going to be 10x now that there's a facility there, and that doesn't count all of the positive impact of having 100 new employees with skilled labor there. So really excited about that. I think these projects complement that. by creating not just the tax base, and they do take up property, but when you consider Sourbeck Drive-In is an IPD zoning, it's an industrial essentially zoning, and it's really all the way down to exit 17, but from exit 18 all the way to the Sourbeck Drive-In, it's all been industrial for 25 years.
Yeah.
At the Commerce Extension, there are 7 spec industrial buildings that are planned that were built for no needs for variances or anything. They were built to the specs. They'll be Class A industrial. They'll likely be filled, hopefully, before they're constructed. The first one goes into construction here, I think, in the next week or two. And so that area has been set aside for these things.
Right.
When you consider what industry can locate and will locate, data center is an optimal option based off of that tax base and based off of their low impact to the community. One thing I would like to have, just make sure I have enough time to get into.
Well, even before that,
Sure.
Let me just, for perspective, the Commerce Parkway location is actually right next to a natural gas power plant and right across the road from the Kentucky State Reformatory.
Yeah.
So that's just for perspective where we're talking about. Go ahead.
I think some of the things that have been unpleasant is that the rhetoric continues to be as if folks wanted to develop this on an agricultural piece of land up on 53, and that's just not the case and hadn't been the case. The other thing is I think that some of the I know that a big part of the problem in the community and how ugly that this has gotten has to come from wrong information that was put out either intentionally or just the fever of everything continues to pick up. But to the point where industrial bonds were going to be used to, or municipal bonds were going to be used to widen roads. There were going to be, people rented limousines when we went to Loudon, Virginia. We gave away all of the tax revenue through incentives. I mean, all of that was completely fabricated. But then also, one important one was 3 trillion particulates will come out of the power plant, giving the impression it would be coming off a data center. But that will be the impact will be felt in the LG&E region, whether it's in Oldham County or not. And now, unfortunately, we're going to get that impact, but we're not going to get any of that tax revenue. Okay. And so we had an imperfect environment to place a data center based off the fact that we have an emerging industry that showed up and not having regs available. There's a principled position that I appreciate, which is everything has to be buttoned up and perfect before we make this thing work. And then I think there's more of a practical, which I typically, again, I'm not an elected official, but my opinion is that we had a bird in the hand and we had regs. We had the ability to create binding elements and hold them to a standard within IPD in an area where this should be anyway. And so this has been disappointing, but hopefully there'll be other opportunities. My fear is that the regs that get written will be.
We'll be right back.
Sorry.
Now, Back to Kentucky's Voice Radio, online at kyvoice.org.
Welcome back. I'm your special host for Kentucky Voice, Dr. Lance Pearson with the Kentucky Liberty Caucus. That's kylibertycaucus.com if you want to check out our website. This last segment, we're going to discuss some of the negatives. David Bazanis with the Oldham County Chamber did an excellent job of pointing out some of the positives. So we'll hit on some of the negatives. I hope to have Lindsay on, but my producer's telling me we're having audio difficulties. So maybe next time I host, we'll have Senator Titchener on. So what's the status of these data center projects? Oldham County instituted a 150-day moratorium that basically says we are not going to accept any more data center applications for the next 150 days while we work out our ordinances and regulations. You may be surprised that no county in Kentucky, to our knowledge, has existing ordinances that really capture especially hyperscale data centers, but even smaller data centers. Jefferson County, I think, hamstrung their data center proposals into something called a co-location telehotel. Whatever in the world that means. So we're all scrambling to figure out how to regulate these things, mitigate some of the negatives, and maybe still try to incorporate them into our economic base. So let me just hop into basically some of the criticisms, and many of these criticisms are valid, of some of the negatives of data centers. And so I really would have loved to have an interview with someone to present this. Don't take this as the gospel just because it's coming from the host's mouth, but we just got to scramble. So one of the biggest barriers, or one of the biggest negatives that are associated with these hyperscale data centers, is the amount of noise that they potentially can generate. Now, as we said, these are computer systems that are running 24/7, 365. They can't be down for even a minute. So they've got backup generators on site. On the initial $6 billion build proposal, I believe they proposed between 150 and 180 3 to 4 megawatt industrial diesel generators on site. Now, those would only come on in principle when the power was out. But you can imagine each one of these generators is roughly the size of an RV. And so if those things are running at any given time and you've got 150 or 180 of these things operating, even if you're doing something to mitigate some of the noise, that's going to be very intrusive no matter what. Now, hopefully your power isn't going to be down. They don't have to be on all the time, and they would just be on during occasional testing, maybe once or twice a week, or once or twice a month. But noise is a significant barrier. You also think of these, even when the generators aren't on, they still have to have air conditioning units that are constantly cooling these. And so if you ever go to a large building, a school, during the middle of summer when those air conditioners on top of the school are cranking away, they make a lot of noise. And so that's 24/7. Now, some of those noise considerations can be mitigated, but they are a significant thing that ordinances need to account for. A second concern that a lot of the people that were opposed to the data center or a hyperscale data center project is the amount of electricity these things are going to use. So we touched on this in the first segment. If it were a 600 megawatt build, which was the initial Highway 53 proposal, that would be using the equivalent of almost 500,000 homes. Oldham County only has 70,000 residents. So the amount of electricity this project would be using would be multiple times the entire county's electrical demand. And so that raises some questions. We already have the occasional brownout, just like Jefferson or Shelby or Spencer, I'm sure, have. If we're adding on basically 2 or 3 times the amount of electrical need for our county, is it likely that we're going to have more brownouts or more issues? We also likely would have to upgrade the grid. So if you're using that much electricity, you need larger power lines, you need additional electrical substations. How do we assure that the cost of all of that extra energy production isn't going to get passed down to your average consumers? There were also some questions, and I never got a really strong answer for how much water we're talking about these proposals using, but all of the numbers that I heard were in the millions of gallons per day. Now, that seemed to be within the capacity of the Oldham County's water district. We are right by the Ohio River, which has an almost unlimited amount of water, but nevertheless, like, that's a lot of water. We'll probably have to upgrade the water mains and those sorts of things. So there was some questions there. The initial proposal, which was on agricultural land and in the middle of some residential properties, there was a lot of worry that we're putting these gigantic warehouses in. And for perspective, this was going to occupy a site that was roughly like 2 Oxmoor malls, 8 warehouses, 2.5 million square feet under roof on multiple floors. I believe at one point it was 6 or 7 floors of servers. So when you put that in the middle of what is essentially agricultural land or residential, does that fit? Is it going to change the character of the whole neighborhood? And does it match anything that's already there? There were also some worries about traffic, especially during the construction phase. So we didn't actually get into the amount of construction jobs that could be brought by one of these facilities coming in, but and the estimates I heard were on that $6 billion build, as many as 1,000 construction jobs could be brought in just to build out these warehouses and to put in all the computer systems and servers and networking equipment. But with all that construction comes some construction traffic. There were also a lot of issues that got pushed back in terms of whether they were going through the appropriate process that allowed for community feedback and elected officials going on record whether they supported it or not. So those are some of the objections that were raised by opponents of these projects. Now, the next question that basically comes are, if we were to have data center proposals in the future, and there's certainly a possibility, WHP has pulled out of both projects now that the moratorium is in place. But that doesn't mean that LG&E and KU, the utility company, which somewhat recruited these data center projects to come in, they're very profitable for the power companies. Is it likely that they'll be able to recruit some other companies to maybe put in a data center or propose a data center elsewhere? And if so, what would need to be in place for the community to really get behind it more than they did this first one? Excuse me. I believe the first thing that we really want is what this moratorium was designed for in the first place. If they're going to come into the community, we do need to have ordinances in place. And I'm not saying that WHP was opposed to any of those ordinances in particular. They were just taking a process that the community worried that there would be no regulation and they could do whatever they want. There was also some concern that the initial proposal wasn't in an appropriately zoned area. So, David, could you talk about the possibility for other locations that a data center might be interested in Oldham County?
Sure. I do think, and I do just one point to the mention of LG&E recruiting. My impression of LG&E's position right now is that they are on their heels, just like everybody else, trying to plan for a significant amount of upgrades that will happen based off of all the interest for data centers, not just in Oldham County, but really across the state. So while there was a map that showed there were inquiries or 7 locations, several of those not in necessarily desirable areas. Many of those, 4 of those, I believe, were inquiries, which, again, somebody calling and asking and inquiring does not make a data center project. So my opinion, and being responsible for site selection in the county, is that Commerce Parkway is an ideal location for data centers to consider. And again, now we're talking about what data centers do we mean? Do we mean all hyperscale data centers? Do we mean every data center that would come and make a presentation? The answer is no. There are lots of data centers that are noisy, and there are data centers that have emissions, and we don't want any of that. And we've been on record saying that to WHP and whatnot, who had assured us that wasn't the type of data center they were going to develop. And so I don't think we would entertain anything than the top level quality of a data center. So Commerce Parkway is ideal. Hopefully in the future we'll have an opportunity to put some industry on the KSR site. That is a good opportunity, but the state's firmly in control of that site, and I don't think that they're very interested, based off the various red and blue politics on data centers, to be able to use KSR for that. And then Oldham Reserve has been brought up because there was an inquiry that was brought to Oldham Reserve. That inquiry is just an inquiry level. It takes a long time for anybody to get serious about anything they would pursue. It's nowhere near somebody putting in an application, and I don't think the board has heard, or even the development partners have heard nearly enough to think that it's an up or down type of a proposition. So is that a harder sell? I think it's harder from an investment standpoint to be able to get power to that site, much less whether it's going to how it would fit into the park. So I think that's a long conversation that is not going to happen. I hope that we can have some good regulations. I'm fearful. Oldham County's done this before. We did this with distilleries. We had a lot of distillery inquiries. We had a great distillery here. Jefferson's Reserve is now building in a new location. And one of the things that our community attempted to do with goodwill towards distilleries was, we like the distillery projects and understand that while distilleries would have to go in industrial zoning, that our industrial zoning isn't necessarily a place you want to create a distillery or a tourism project. And so there was a magistrate spearheaded the effort, and Ag 2 Business District was written. It took months. The planning and zoning staff was involved in it, and then, of course, research goes along with that process. And then folks started saying, well, there's fungus that kind of grows on things when they get close to distilleries. And so next thing you know, we had setbacks that were made it basically impossible to find a distillery site in Oldham County. Jefferson's couldn't find a site that was adequate for them. They tried to stay here. We have Kentucky Artisan Distillery, which is a great brand. As they grow, hopefully they can find a way to make it work here in Oldham County. But I don't want that to be the case with data centers, considering the payoff. I think the not criticisms, but the challenges that you just outlined there, I think those are all very easy to overcome and have something that's good for the community. So my hope is that we can get to a much more productive conversation. I'm not really encouraged by it, frankly. In fact, I'm quite discouraged. Oh,
thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your time. Man, I'm sorry. I should watch the numbers up there.
Thanks.